In the course of putting together Al Bielik's story, we've covered many, many, many subjects, and quite frankly, these subjects will be hard for the average person to believe. So in an effort to add more credibility and verification to Al's account of his life, we look to find others who also participated in some of these secret projects. One such person is Stewart Swerdlow. You've heard Al talk about the many years and many projects he participated in at Montauk, a secret base on the northern tip of Long Island. One of the most disturbing segments was his discussion of the mind control project. Stewart claims to have also been part of that project, and this program will explore his perspective of that experience. Stewart, welcome to the program.
Thank you.
I personally appreciate you being here.
I appreciate the opportunity to speak.
Oh, great. Why don't we start out with some background? Were you born and raised in New York?
I was born in Brooklyn, New York, and I spent the early part of my life there. Mm-hmm. But I also spent a significant amount of time traveling around and spending bits of my childhood in other parts of the country, like in Miami and also in Quebec.
Okay. Were you born in the 50s, just to give us...
1956.
56, okay. And so where did you go to high school?
Well, I started going to high school in a little town on the central part of Suffolk County, Long Island, called Smithtown Central High School, mm-hmm. which since that time has greatly expanded and split into two different schools.
And during your high school years, was there anything different about you?
Well, there's been something different about me most of my life. But as far as my high school years are concerned, yes, I was very much withdrawn from social groups because I knew I didn't fit in or belong. And I also had experiences that I could not talk about, nor did I expect anyone to understand.
Wow. And these experiences that you had, would you characterize them as, say, metaphysical, perhaps?
Well, that would be, I suppose, an overall umbrella term to cover that. But I would use a better word using, let's say, interdimensional, or even non-physical would be a better description of them.
Did you actually see beings?
Well, of course I did, but that went way back before high school. In the very beginning, I did remember as a child having experiences with what I now know to be the alien beings. However, as I got older and became a teenager and even into my 20s, that experience developed more towards being with human beings who were in the guise of aliens, and some of whom were in the guise of military personnel who would perform certain experiments and ask me to do certain functions and tasks for them.
And this was during high school?
That was during high school. I started high school in 1970, and that was just the beginning of the Montauk Project. It didn't become really wild and crazy until about 72, 73.
Yeah, as I understand it, that was kind of the first phase of the mind control part of Montauk.
Correct, and it was after that, or actually during that time, that it moved into genetic manipulation and then finally into time travel.
Wow. Let's go back. You talked about you had experience with aliens. Do you recall which group?
From childhood?
Yes.
Yeah, from the very beginning, the first memory I have of that was of approximately the age of 3.
Wow.
And when I was in my room alone at the time, I remember waking up and being taken aboard what I thought was a little bus or a car of some kind that was hovering outside my window. And it wasn't very large because I was only 3 years old, and I remember that my head wasn't that far from the ceiling. And there was only one other being in this vehicle who was about my size. Now, it was not the typical gray that you hear about in books and movies, but rather it had a kind of a plant-like appearance to it, a slight green tinge to it, slimy, very thin, and it even communicated telepathically, and somehow let me know, even at 3 years old, that it lived like a moving plant. And that was my very first experience with this type of creature.
That is not the typical extraterrestrial we as humans think of, but for those who really dig into this subject, there are many references to extraterrestrials who are not humanoid.
That's correct, and in fact, it was during that experience, and I wrote about this in my book, Alien Connection.
Mm-hmm.
This being took me to a platform that was orbiting the Earth, and it was on this platform that I actually met a very wide variety of alien life forms that were in some kind of a council or group, and actually told me about my own creation and genetic inheritance and what I was supposed to do on the Earth. Of course, at 3 years old, I didn't quite understand it.
Could imagine.
But it was years later that a lot of this information that obviously had been downloaded into my cellular structure started coming to the surface, and I started remembering more and more about that experience.
Well, do you think your mother was perhaps implanted to some degree prior to your birth, or there was some manipulation going on while you were in her womb?
Well, that's a very interesting question, because I write about this in my Alien Connection book.
Mm-hmm.
My birth was extremely unusual. In fact, when my mother went into labor with me, she was taken to a hospital that was not completely built yet, and in fact moved her into a wing that wasn't even opened. In fact, it was November and there was no heat and it was quite cold.
Mm-hmm.
And they examined her and told her that there was no way she could have become pregnant because she had no birth canal. She was completely born with a birth defect that completely sealed up her birth canal, and they told her it was impossible for her to become pregnant. Therefore, they had to do surgery before I was born, while she was in labor, to actually create a birth canal. And as it just so happened, and I put that in quotes, there was a doctor from Texas who just happened to be in that hospital and who just happened to be an expert in that kind of surgery. And so he did the surgery, and I was pulled from her womb with forceps, because I was literally hooked onto her pelvic bone. And so they told her that I was consider it to be an immaculate conception, because there was no way she could have naturally become pregnant. And of course, back in the 1950s, they didn't have such thing as in vitro fertilization or anything like that. So she thought she had become pregnant the normal way, and yet they told her that was impossible.
So obviously, Stewart, there was some plan for you. You were prepared.
Well, I was told subsequently, and that wasn't until I was a teenager, at the project that they told me I was genetically created. I was a manipulated project that was implanted in her womb for a specific purpose.
And did they ever tell you who actually did this work?
It was a combination of the scientists from Nazi Germany, American scientists, and Russian scientists in conjunction with an alien group.
And do you know who that alien group was?
Yeah, it was from Sirius A.
Oh, those guys.
Yeah.
Okay. Al does talk about them at Montauk briefly.
Yeah, they used a lot of their technology in Montauk Project.
Okay. Now I'm gonna jump ahead just a little bit, and then we'll go back. But first of all, do you know Al Bielek?
Oh, of course.
Now, how do you connect with him?
I met Al years ago, and during the project I did not know him because I was in a different category. Mm-hmm. He was more involved in the control or functioning of the project, where I was involved in the actual workings of the experiments and being part of the experiments.
Okay, so while you were there, you never met him.
I knew of him,
mm-hmm.
and I did not meet him personally because he was a very high superior compared to me, and I just never met him. It's kind of like being a page in the White House and knowing the president's there but not officially meeting him.
Wow.
And but I did meet Al back in 91,
mm-hmm.
Preston brought him to my home, and I've known him ever since, and he's visited me quite often.
Very interesting. For our listeners, though, could you characterize what the Montauk project, the Montauk Mind Control Project was, and what its goals were?
Yeah. Initially, from what I know about it, it was an outgrowth of the German mind control experiments that occurred back in the 20s and 30s and 40s. Now, the reason that they needed to really expand on this in 1970 was because of the Dulce Wars that occurred in July of 1969 underneath New Mexico, where there was an actual attack on humans in this underground base in the Four Corners area. And the humans lost, and the aliens did take over the base, and it was decided then that should this information leak out, which they knew it eventually would, and the population of the Earth knew officially that there was an alien presence that could not be controlled, there would be mass panic and chaos. Mm-hmm. And so they decided to create a project that would control the minds of people globally, and that way ensure peace and order under any circumstances. And so they chose Montauk, number one, because it was so far removed from a populated area, being on the very eastern tip of Long Island, just south of the Rhode Island-Connecticut border, mm-hmm. and completely surrounded by water, and there was only one way in and one way out, and most of the year it was kind of bleak and deserted. So it was a very good place from which to do work. And it already had an established underground base, which was actually commissioned in 1799 by George Washington. Mm-hmm. And so this project initially was about mind control, and they brought in heavy hitters from the Nazi era, the German scientists that were working in the concentration camps. And they also brought in a lot of Soviet scientists and even a lot of Americans. And on a couple of occasions, I did even see Israeli scientists, and very rarely did I see any Asian or other Europeans there.
So would you say the majority of the activities that went on at Montauk were underground?
I would say 90% of them were underground, especially during the later years of the project. Let's say from 75 to 83, it was basically totally underground. The first 5 years, from 70 to 75, there was some activity above ground.
Mm-hmm. Now, I've heard this project named Phoenix.
Yeah.
With a Phoenix 1, 2, and 3. Is it different phases in different years? For instance, Phoenix 1, according to someone else, started in 48. Is that how you recall the name of this as well?
Yeah, and it was also called the Rainbow Project. There were many umbrellas that were given to it, and then many feeders that come out from the umbrellas that have specific functions. And so Montauk itself was under the Phoenix Project, mm-hmm. and it had sister projects in Europe and in the western part of the United States. In Europe, there was an underground base in the Alsace-Lorraine region where the French and German border are. And curiously enough, this area became the headquarters for the European Parliament in the city of Strasbourg. Mm-hmm. And that project was called MALDA, M-A-L-D-A. And then in the western United States, they had similar projects going on in what became known as Area 51. All of these were tied together, but Montauk was the parent project for mind control and genetic manipulation. A lot of the genetic manipulation was then also transferred to Plum Island, which is just off the coast of Long Island, which to this day is still heavily guarded, and no private citizen can go there, only government scientists.
So going back, would you say that the purpose of the mind control part of Montauk was just so that we would not believe that aliens existed?
I wouldn't say that exactly. I would say it was to prepare human beings for the actual knowledge that aliens exist, so that there would not be panic and chaos.
So they were convinced that if people thought aliens, or if they knew aliens existed, they would lose it?
Yeah, because basically the idea was right after World War II, when the Roswell incident occurred, the government realized that if they were to reveal an alien presence on the Earth that could not be controlled or stopped, that would cause mass panic. After the Nazi scare and then the communists in Russia and all of these things going on, the U.S. could not be made to look weak. It had to be made to look powerful, and therefore they would keep everything under wraps and make everyone who admitted seeing UFOs or had proof of it discredit them or eliminate them.
But apparently a lot of extraterrestrials worked in this program as well.
Yes, they did. The bottom line really is that there is an alien group that really was the first ones on this planet and consider it to be theirs, and they've always been here. So that is a fact that the government is having a difficulty in releasing to the public because to do so would show many implications of far-ranging areas, including religion, politics, economics, what have you, that would just destroy all the institutions as we now know them.
Include, I mean, our whole paradigm right there.
Everything.
Everything. Let me take a guess. Was that initial group, were they the reptilians?
Absolutely.
Okay.
They were the first colonists on this planet.
And they were here far before we were.
They certainly were, and they colonized a continent that was known as Lemuria or Mu, which no longer exists. However, remnants of it do exist still. The islands of Hawaii are at the very center of what was that continent, and most of the Pacific Rim, including the western portion of California west of the San Andreas Fault Line, is also part of Lemuria.
And would you say that there are many, many of these in existence right now, these reptilians?
Yeah. What happened, to make a very long story short, was that there were then human colonists that came to this world and colonized what we call now Atlantis.
Okay.
And there were battles between them. And the Lemurian continent sank. The remnants of those people went either underground into the earth, some went to the planet Venus, and some mixed with humans on the earth and created hybrids.
Is that what was described in the Bible?
Well, when the Bible describes the God saying, "Let us make man in our own image," it's plural. It is not a singular God saying that. It is a group of beings discussing the formation of a prototype of mankind. One of the possible treaties that was tried to create peace on the earth back in those days was the creation of a new human prototype, which the Bible calls Adam. And this was supposed to be a combination of the reptilian with humanoid forms so that they would be a model of peace that could exist on the earth. The condition was that the androgynous reptilian body be used as the basis for it. Now, the reptilians are androgynous, meaning male and female in the same body. There are no sexes in the reptilian races. And so the story of the removal of the rib of Adam to create Eve is an allegory for the separation of a reptilian body into a male and female component. And then DNA was then added of humanoid forms to create a prototype for a human being.
It's quite fascinating. Have you ever actually seen a reptilian?
Oh, I certainly have.
You've worked with them?
I didn't work with them, but I worked under the direction of them through others.
Is this the same thing as a Draco?
Yeah, the Draco is actually the name of the star system.
Okay.
Now, that's another problem because that is the home area of the reptilian races. Now, the ones that are here on the Earth have changed or moved into another form of civilization or culture, which is not the intention that the Draco intended when they first came here. So the reptilians on this planet are in big trouble.
And they are directly related to the Montauk Project.
Yeah, they were very much involved with that because they are tired of living hidden lives, and they are very anxious to become public once more as they were in the past. And in order to do that, they are literally blitzing the media with reptilian-like programs and shows, especially for children.
Mm-hmm.
And they're preparing adults through electromagnetic transmissions for the public appearance of reptilians.
Does that say that they have a weakness in a sense, that if we panicked, we could somehow, I don't know, destroy them, and they're looking to integrate with us?
Well, one of their biggest weaknesses is that they are not very spiritually minded. They don't have a lot of psychic ability.
Mm-hmm.
They rely a lot on technology, and they rely a lot on controlling others through technology. And so the biggest threat to them is people having control of their own minds. Because if you do have control of your minds, it's very difficult for them to gain control of the mind pattern of the species.
Mm-hmm.
So it's in their best interest if we have a community-like behavior or a hive mentality rather than individuality.
Mm-hmm. Well, both Preston and Al talked about this experience with the Draco at Montauk. That's what they called him.
Yeah.
And they said he seemed to be the one calling the shots. Now, Preston didn't like him very much at all.
I know.
In fact, he said that the Draco called him a Pleiadian dog.
Yeah, I remember that. I remember.
Al, on the other hand, said that he was a bit arrogant, but after several meetings, the two of them sort of struck a basic friendship. Did you ever actually see or meet this Draco?
There was more than one.
Mm-hmm.
You see, there are 7 different species of reptilian.
Wow.
Each one is like a hierarchy.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, the Hindu caste system is based on the reptilian hierarchy. And it goes all the way from the winged reptilians, the tall ones, who were the leaders and would be the Brahmins, so to speak, all the way down to a very small, diminutive worker type, which were a different color, had no tail, no wings, and they were very weak. And they would be like the untouchables.
Mm-hmm.
So there was a wide range. Now, in Montauk, there was this very tall winged reptilian, and he was very, very powerful. I only saw him from a distance, but I remember on many occasions being in the room, the experimentation room, which was surrounded by glass, and seeing him on the other side of the glass. Now, we use the word him to describe it, but it really didn't have a gender. It's androgynous.
I see.
It's really an it. But they're so powerful and aggressive that we assign male characteristics to it.
Yes. Is this where the legend of the dragons and all that comes from?
Basically, yes. And it's also the legend of hell and demons living under the earth.
Yes.
Because that's where they were driven.
By whom?
By the Atlanteans.
Well, the Atlanteans, though, died out.
The Atlanteans really destroyed themselves.
Yeah.
And it was after the destruction of the Atlantean continent that the reptilians, who were now underground, decided to retake the surface.
Mm-hmm.
But by then, to show themselves would create a lot of fear and panic among the population. So what they did was start a hybridization program where they actually created a royalty or elite group that infiltrated many cultures and became their leaders. And to this very day, they are the leaders and royalties of Europe and much of the wealthy families that control this planet.
Well,
and they're a hybrid.
Okay, now that's interesting because I've heard the term shape-shifting.
Yes.
Is this something that they can do?
Yeah, especially, see, all human beings have reptilian DNA. That's what the story of Adam was about.
Is that why we have a tailbone?
Yeah, and why you have skin that wrinkles and peel, why we have reptilian brainstem, because we have reptilian DNA. That's why they consider us to be part of them, and why they have no problem in controlling this world. But the shapeshifters actually have more of a 50-50 split between human and reptilian genetics. See, most human beings have less than 10% reptilian genetics, whereas the shapeshifters are 50-50. Now, when they start getting more towards the reptilian side, they have a harder time keeping a human form, and therefore they need to ingest human hormone and bodily materials in order to maintain a human form.
Like blood?
Yeah, like blood, organs, that type of thing.
Huh. Now, I would assume you would classify yourself as a sensitive?
Well, I don't know if there's a word that describes me.
Okay.
Lately, I've been using the word mentalist, but I'm not too thrilled with that.
That might be good for this week, right?
Yeah, but anyone can come up with a nice word. I'd be looking forward to it.
Well, here's where I'm going with this. If you were to walk by, say, one of these 50-50 people, would you be able to pick up on it?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay. Now, the average person, would they not be able to?
Not visually, but subliminally, they probably could. Because there is an energetic field around them, which if you can't see visually or mentally, you can feel it. And generally, you get the idea that I don't like this person, or this person is nasty or aggressive, or some negative feeling that you might get. And then you need to look at that.
Are there any people that you know of that would, that the listener to this would be able to identify as, that you know they're a reptilian, that the listener would know?
Well, just take a look at the royal family of England.
Of England,
or
okay.
any of the royal family in Europe, because they're all related. And in fact, even most of the presidents of the United States.
You say most of the presidents?
Not all of them, but most of them.
Huh. Well, I know it's very interesting that they all have some relationship to a royal family in England or Scotland.
Exactly.
And so you think that's where they get the DNA from?
Oh, that's exactly where it comes from. They're all related to Charlemagne.
Huh. Then at Montauk, who would you say actually ran the show?
Well, there was John von Neumann. And then there was this tall reptilian whom, again, I didn't have direct contact with him, but I did see him, and we all knew to stay away from him. And then during the years, I had many different controllers who would be, or I should say overseers, who would be in charge of what I'd be doing. Now, I was in no way high up in any ranks. However, the anomaly for me was that I survived a lot of it. They told me that less than 1% of the people who were experimented upon actually survived. And of that 1%, very few were able to function to any degree normally. And because I was able to do that, I became an anomaly for them. And so they allowed me more freedoms than they did the others.
Wow.
And eventually, I moved up from being a guinea pig, if you want to use that term, to being one who actually prepared the other children for work with some of the psychics and for some of the experimentations.
Well, let's get into this program and the process of the program itself. So, as I understand it, the program was to create a mind-controlled slave?
That's how it started out.
Okay, were you involved with this program at that point?
Yes, I was. I was there from the beginning.
From the very beginning?
Yeah.
How did you get recruited into this?
Well, I was about to explain. My great-uncle was the first president of the Soviet Union. And because of that, my family was very closely followed in this country and basically used for purposes on this side of the Atlantic.
Okay, because there would have been some DNA associated with him, right?
Absolutely.
Okay, it seems like they always track the DNA.
They go along family lines, yes.
Yes, okay. So you were tracked, and then how did you get into it? Did they grab you, or?
Well, it wasn't like they grabbed me, but even from childhood, I can remember even being 2 and 3 years old where my grandmother's husband, who was a Mason, 33-degree Mason, would take me to areas where these other little children were being abused, threatened, all kinds of things happening with them. And even as I got older, I would be taken at night by what I thought at the time were aliens to various places for indoctrination and experimentation. And it wasn't until we moved to Long Island that it became pretty much a daily event.
Did your parents know about this?
Well, I'll tell you, my mother refuses to talk about it. I asked her to talk about certain things, if she'd be willing to talk publicly. She absolutely refused.
Mm-hmm.
And my father is very annoyed with me for even speaking about it and told me I had no right to do so.
Why do you think he's annoyed?
Well, he was involved in certain government projects back in the early 50s in New Mexico and West Texas. And for the first 3 years of my life, he was followed by military or Secret Service people. And to this very day, he refuses to discuss a lot of the information. Now, his mother was a Soviet spy, and in fact spent a lot of World War II traveling back and forth to Europe. And when she died, he took all of her passports, her information, photos, etc., and burned them in the fireplace before anybody could get a hold of them. So he's covering up a lot of stuff. He doesn't talk much at all. And I'm positive that both of them know more than they're willing to say.
Stewart, how would you describe your relationship with your parents right now?
Very strained. You know, we speak about certain topics, and then there's certain topics we don't speak about.
Do they live close to you?
They're about 25 minutes away from me.
Oh, very interesting. So you think that it was von Neumann and a Draco that actually ran the whole program at Montauk?
That I knew of.
Did they report to anybody that you think of?
The only ones that I can imagine, now I have no idea, proof that they reported to it, but I know von Neumann reported to many people in Germany and also within upper echelons of this government. You see, at a certain level, there really is no government. There's just one government all over the earth.
Mm-hmm.
And these political parties and different governments and nations are just for public consumption.
Do you think Dr. John von Neumann is still alive?
I was told, at least up to about 3 years ago, that he was, but he'd probably be an extremely old man by now.
Yeah.
I understood he lived in upstate New York.
We actually have some pictures, supposedly, of him in upstate New York, and he looks pitiful.
Yeah, I imagine so. And I remember back in the early 90s, Preston was still getting communication from him.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this is true. Okay, so he supposedly tapped into or reported to the secret government.
Yeah, but at both sides of it. In other words, the Illuminati, who really control the Earth government, have different factions among themselves as well. They're by no means all brotherly and peaceful with each other.
Mm-hmm.
And so there are factions, each trying to outdo the other.
I see. So somehow you got recruited into Montauk at an early age. I guess you were still into high school, right?
I was about 14.
Okay, and you said there were daily visits?
Yeah, they would come for me at night, and what they have is the ability to shift time and space so that point A and point B become one point.
Mm-hmm.
And they would actually create an energetic connection from where I was to the Montauk Project.
Even back then?
Even back then. They've had this technology for a very long time.
Ah. Okay, because that's a little unclear in our discussions with Al as far as how long they actually had it. Was this the chair that was at Montauk?
Well, the chair was used for the psychics. They used these chairs to create vortices or gateways to other dimensions and times.
Would those gateways, though, be the same ones that were used to get you?
A form of it. See, here's the thing. When you create an opening from one dimension to another, that would be a vortex.
Mm-hmm.
When you create a shortcut from point A to point B within the same reality, that's a wormhole. So what they actually created was wormholes around the Earth to connect to whoever they needed for that moment.
Okay. Did they come under the guise of an extraterrestrial, though?
Sometimes they did, especially in the very beginning. And I guess that was just from my understanding. until I realized what was going on, and then they no longer had to put up that charade.
Why would they do that in the first place?
Because in the event a person becomes conscious during the abduction scenario, it's better that they see an alien that they don't understand and who has no legal responsibility on the earth, rather than you wake up and you see a military person that you can identify and then becomes the responsibility of the government.
So were they, in this process, preparing you for the work that you're going to do at Montauk?
Yes, they were. I was already genetically prepared for it.
Mm-hmm.
What they were trying to do was enhance that and see how far they could go with it.
So there must have been many, many others that they did the same thing with.
Supposedly there were, but many of them didn't survive.
Mm-hmm.
I am told that, as I mentioned earlier, that less than 1% survived.
Well, do you know any others who have survived?
I have met many people who claimed to be in the Montauk Project.
Okay.
Now, all of them that I would see, I would know if they were telling the truth or not, because there's a certain resonance or signature in the energy field that I recognize.
Mm-hmm.
Now, at least half of the people I met who claimed to be part of that were not. Now, that's not saying that they're being deceptive. It means they might really believe they were.
Yeah.
And part of the electromagnetic programming that's being beamed out through much of the planet has these little scenarios that are implanted in your mind pattern that you can believe are real.
Yeah, and I mean, that could be part of the misinformation campaign.
Yes. And that's what a lot of the channeling is that's out there. Channeling is basically coming from satellites. Now,
all channeling?
95% of it. That started back in the mid-'60s, way before Montauk.
Yes.
And that was part of a disinformation dissemination program by the NSA, so that people would believe that there were space brothers coming to save us, and so you wouldn't really have to do anything but just wait until you went into the fourth or fifth dimension and life would be good and wonderful, when in fact it was a clever ploy to get you to just not do anything.
Huh.
It was also a way for them to see how transmitted satellite information would be received through the brain and how it would come out. And they would infiltrate all of these groups and then be able to fine-tune the way they transmit the programming.
You know, as I think of the logistics of channeling, how would they know exactly when the receiver is ready to do his channeling? Because I've seen some of it. In fact, I've seen many people channel. And it's at their time, at their will. They sit down and they say, now we begin, and then it goes.
Mm-hmm.
How would the government know at that time to turn on the program?
You have to remember that the program is usually turned on when the person is sleeping and downloaded into their brain. And then, when there are certain triggers which are transmitted by ground transmission, the person then goes into their act. Now, most of the time, that's about 95% of the channeling that's done on the Earth now is from satellite transmission. There's a very small percentage that is not. My feeling is, and what we learned at Montauk, is that the ones who channel real entities is kind of low level anyway, because no high level entity needs to take over your body in order to transmit information. If they're so high level, they can just instantly download into your mind and you know it instantaneously without giving up who you are, your persona. So the act of channeling is in itself, in my mind, a form of carjacking. You know, it's like, you get out and I get in.
That's a new perspective for me on channeling.
I know that people don't accept that because they've been conditioned to believe that it's a positive, wonderful thing.
Mm-hmm.
And that's part of the disinformation.
And so you think the whole goal of that program is to lull people into doing nothing?
Absolutely. And if you take all the information that's been channeled and lay it right next to each other, they're practically identical. And absolutely none of the predictions have ever come true. They're just there to lull you into a false sense of security.
Wow. Well, that's an interesting another topic. We can go on for hours with these subjects. Let's get back to Montauk, though.
Yes.
And, okay, let's just say here it is, day one, reporting to duty. How were you taken there? And what was your responsibility initially?
First of all, we would get there through these wormholes for the most part.
Okay.
Sometimes we would physically be transported in vehicles. But for the most part, we would be taken at night, and it would be through the wormhole.
Mm-hmm.
When we were there, depending on who you were, you had different functions and responsibilities. In the very beginning, my job was to become a booster or power pack for the psychics on the chair, one of whom was Duncan Cameron. And they used the energies of young teenagers or young children to boost his energy or whoever else was on the chair so that he could open up a vortex mentally that could then be downloaded into a computer system as a software. And then that could be replayed without him personally having to do that. What they found was, and what they were trying to do, was to use the human mind to create software that could be downloaded and saved on a computer program and then used and manipulated at will.
Did you ever see these computers?
Yeah. In the beginning, they were different than they were at the end. In 1970, some of these computers looked like they took up the peripheral of an entire room.
Mm-hmm.
Some of it was Earth technology, a lot of it was not. In some of the rooms where they used the children for specifically was to induce a heightened sense of fear and anxiety that would then be transmitted to these poles located at the four corners of the room that would literally absorb the energy of the fear and anxiety. That could then be amplified and broadcast out into the public because mind control works best on a person who is afraid.
Sure does.
If you create a situation of panic and anxiety, that person's mind pattern is open to the point where they can be manipulated very easily.
Could they broadcast that to an entire city?
Oh, they have. They have.
Do you know of any examples?
Yes,
that you could say?
The riots in L.A. in '94.
Was that an experiment?
That was an experiment to see what would happen if chaos existed in a large American city. And they were successful with that. What they were trying to determine was how would people react if it was announced that there was an alien invasion? What would happen in a large city?
And could they actually contain it is what they wanted to know,
exactly.
Right?
And as fast as it started, that's how fast they turned it off.
Huh. Very interesting. Now, did you prepare the boys in any way?
Yeah, I did.
Could you describe that for us?
Well, in the beginning, I would prepare them like a little military soldier. They had to act in a certain way. They had, under penalty of being hit or punished.
Mm-hmm.
They had to have their physical bodies prepared in a certain way. They had to really be frightened and anxious and build up the frenzy. And very often they would use my energy to create the state of anxiety and fear in the room.
Now, you were 15 at the time?
I started when I was 14. I didn't get to do that part of the work until I was about 16.
Were you a pretty big guy?
Well, I was bigger than most.
Yeah. But these boys were just little kids, weren't they?
There were many age groups. They were as young as infants in some cases to about 3. Then the other group was till about 8 or 9.
Mm-hmm.
And then from 10 to puberty, and then there was a whole range of groups from teenagers into early adult.
Did you ever have to beat them up?
Yes, we did.
It's kind of hard to... As I listen to you, and I hear the emotion in your voice, I personally cannot see how you would ever agree to that.
Well, I can only tell you that it is the biggest regret of my entire life.
Mm-hmm.
And in fact, with my own children, I have to look at how I speak with them and treat them, and how my reactions fall back to the Montauk reactions that I used to have. And my children will tell you that I was a very strict disciplinarian.
When they were young?
Yeah.
How old are they now?
Well, I have a very wide range of children the youngest being 22 months, and the oldest being in his 20s. And I've been married a couple of times, and I have different sets of family.
Okay.
But my youngest children, I am specifically careful of how I talk to them and treat them, because I don't want to replay the things that I did when I was younger.
But how? How in the world? I mean, this is not your natural substance.
Well, the listener has to understand that we were not consciously doing these things of our own free will, although I do believe there was a part of our mind patterns that allowed this and accepted it.
Mm-hmm.
So we have to take a look at that. And I believe that they were activating our reptilian brain.
Mm.
And so we didn't really understand or know what we were doing, but we were indoctrinated to believe that it was the right thing.
Okay, you're tying a lot together for us, Stu. I mean, thank you. You know, as Preston called it, he said it was his alternate reality when he was there.
Yes.
You know, it wasn't this reality; it was a different one. Do you feel the same way?
It was like a dream state.
Now, when you were there, let's just say I knocked on the door, they let me into Montauk. Would I have seen anything? Would it have been a different dimension that you operated in?
Well, if you were actually let into the area, it would have been quite physical.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you would have seen physical bodies and physical machinery and equipment. Now, the non-physical part exists when they would send someone interdimensionally,
mm-hmm.
or when they would hook you up to a computer and you would go into an altered state. And very often, when they built up this frenzy in the room of fear and anxiety, the overall energetics of that room would put you in an altered reality. It would be like a living nightmare.
Wow.
That's the only way I can explain it.
Yeah. So how long were you there, from age 15 till?
Well,
when?
I was 1970 to 1983, so I was from the age of 14 to 27.
Wow. Now, during the day, did you have a normal job?
Yes, I did. And I worked for a company that was related to the Montauk Project. And the symbol of that company was the Ankh.
The Ankh.
Yeah, that company no longer exists.
What is an Ankh?
An Ankh is an Egyptian symbol which looks like a capital T with a loop on top.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And it stands for eternal life, as well as the liaison between physical and non-physical reality.
Wow. Are you free to name that company?
I wouldn't name it publicly. I will only tell you it was a pharmaceutical company.
Wow. Do you think you were placed there?
I know that I was.
Mm-hmm.
And very often, my job there was involved in a lot of travel, and so I was not available most of the time.
So you would travel, go to a hotel room, and they'd pick you up that night?
Exactly.
And you did this for 13 years?
13 years, yes.
Wow. Stewart, what's remarkable talking with you is your memory seems so clear.
That's what I need for people to understand. I always had my memory. It never was buried or suppressed. I never would wake up and say, oh, I remember this, that, or the other thing. I always knew that. I always remembered it.
Mm-hmm.
And I had no one to tell, and that was the frustrating part.
Because as I, talk with Al and I talk with Preston, they only have parts of their memory. And it took many, many years for that memory to come back.
I understand.
Okay? And perhaps what's back is not 100%. In fact, they'll freely admit that. But you're the first one that I've talked to who can issue out such details. But speaking about details, help us paint a picture of what this underground facility actually looked like.
Well, many people have described it as being 8 levels, but in reality it was a 9-level operation.
Mm-hmm.
The number 9 is very important to the Illuminati, and most of their underground facilities have 9 levels of one sort or another. And the very first couple of levels were designed as holding areas, Here's where many of the cages were found, where they actually put the children in and held them until such time as they were needed.
Mm-hmm.
They also would keep soldiers or equipment in these upper levels just for storage purposes. It was generally a staging area. Then there are levels 3, 4, and 5 were generally used for the experimentation and genetic manipulation. Here's where scientific medical programs were developed, where they would inject people with certain type of material, or they would put implants in them or hook them up to certain type of devices just to see the results or see how a person would react to that. And it was in these levels also where the age of the person was important, because depending on the age, they used children to create fear and anxiety for the mind control. They used the teenagers and younger adults for the genetic experimentation. And it was also in these levels, I think it was level 7, where the deep programming for the sleepers was given. Now, sleepers being people who were being programmed for a future time when a certain trigger would be provided and then their function would be opened up, whether that would be as an assassin or as a political person, whatever the function happened to be,
mm-hmm.
they would be programmed at that level. It was at the very deeper level,
mm-hmm.
especially level 8, that they had the time travel, the vortex opened up to many other places. It was kept at a very deep level because in case there was a bombardment from the surface, that would be untouched. It was also at the deeper levels that the tubes leading out into the ocean and into other parts of the continent were available. And that's how they would also bring people in from underground areas.
Was there a gigantic subway?
Yeah, in fact, the whole Earth is crisscrossed with this tube system,
mm-hmm.
Which is very fast. It's faster than a plane.
Mm-hmm.
And it travels basically all over the Earth. Now, originally, they told us they didn't know who built it, that it had been there since day 0.
Huh.
But I know it was built by the Lemurians.
It's that old?
Oh, it's at least 300,000 years old.
Because Al says that when he actually worked in California,
mm-hmm.
to get to Montauk, he would go on the subway.
Yeah.
And that's how he got there, and it just took a very short period of time.
Yeah, very short. In fact, they also built their own tubes with the technology they found. And the technology was very interesting because it never produced debris. It would just simply build a tunnel, and the debris would be incorporated into the walls of the tunnel,
mm-hmm.
which glowed a green color. It was always self-illuminated. So they never needed electrical equipment or anything down there because it was just self-illuminating. Now, that I know was alien technology, but it had been here so long that they just incorporated it into their own. There was one time I was told back in 1961, I believe,
mm-hmm.
there was a spacecraft that came down in the Mojave Desert, and this craft came from the Tau Ceti star system. And the being who they found on board, it was quite human-like, was taken through the tube system to an Air Force base in North Dakota.
Mm-hmm.
And he went in 1961 from the L.A. area all the way to North Dakota in less than 2 hours in this tube system.
Mm.
And of course, when he got there, they did execute him, but they did interrogate him first.
They interrogated, then executed him.
Yeah.
Wow. Now, physically inside Montauk, what did it look like?
Depending on where you were, because you have to remember it was built over a 200-year period.
Mm-hmm. Did the Army Corps of Engineers have anything to do with it?
Oh, yeah, they did. In fact, they're there at this very moment.
So you're saying that the base is operational today?
I was there in June, and the Army Corps of Engineers was there tearing down buildings and covering up openings, and it was a very precarious situation being there. But we did sneak onto the base and managed to see what was going on.
Wow.
So they are in the process of doing something there right now.
Mm-hmm. Do you think you still have any connection to this Montauk project?
I'm sure that I will for the rest of my life. There's programming in me, even now, that I'm sure isn't opened yet.
Yes. So the project continues, doesn't it?
Not in the same way.
Okay. Because you said, didn't you say you're there till 83?
Yes.
Okay, now 83 is such a significant date.
Yeah. August 12th.
Yeah. Without me giving you any leeway on this, and
well, I'll tell you what happened.
Tell us what happened from your perspective.
I'll tell you what I know.
Okay.
In 1983, August 12th, now there was a psychic that was used predominantly to help open these vortices and other software that was downloaded by computer.
Was that
and
Duncan?
He would sit on this chair, which was hooked up to his brain,
mm-hmm.
and whatever he thought, the computer would generate and download.
Mm-hmm.
Now, someone was supposed to be monitoring him, but I guess after all those years, they started getting too lazy or familiar with the process, and he was left alone on the chair, and he fell asleep and had a nightmare. And in the nightmare, he generated this monster energetically that the computer then created physically. And this creature, which they call Junior,
mm-hmm.
started tearing up the base and creating havoc.
Mm-hmm.
And they could not turn it off because it kind of had a life of its own.
Mm-hmm.
The only way to stop it was to destroy the equipment. So in that one night, after all those years, they just destroyed everything. It's just to shut down this creature from continuing its havoc.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the embodiment or energy of that creature is still in the energy field at Montauk. In fact, even in recent years, people who have taken pictures of the area have seen or photographed the outline of it.
Yes.
I believe Preston has a photo like that he could show people.
Yes, and Al does too, and we put a couple of those pictures on this CD.
Yeah. And so, when that happened, those of us who were left kind of were like unplugged from a central computer, and I know personally, for the first time in my life, I felt like I didn't know who I was or what I was supposed to do.
Wow.
I was literally like a Borg that was disconnected from the collective.
Now, Stewart, you talk of this event as if it was just a mistake. That I believe this was Duncan that you're talking about.
Yes.
Who was on the chair.
Right.
That he fell asleep and had a nightmare. I have heard other stories where this was really a planned event.
Well, you know what? I'm open to all of that because the Illuminati have so many scenarios and phases that I wouldn't put anything past them.
Huh.
So it's very possible it was a staged event. However, from my perspective and what I knew, it was an accident.
Well, it was, as described to me, there was an intention to destroy the base, and this was the plan.
Very possible that somehow a nightmare situation was transmitted to Duncan while
mm-hmm.
he was on the chair.
Yeah.
That's a possibility.
Okay.
I would not doubt that.
Now, were you actually at the base when this happened?
No, I was actually at my home in another part of Long Island.
Mm-hmm.
And when it happened, I had a nervous breakdown. I just went berserk. I became an alcoholic. I could not function in my marriage. I was just insane. And that led to a very long period of time where I was just really let loose in the world and was quite wild until finally I was sent to deprogrammers who unfortunately did work for the government, but did download a lot of information for me and help me to get myself at least balanced in some way. However, during that time, I was placed on Prozac, hydrochloride, all kinds of medications designed to make me unaware of who and what I was. And every time I complained about it, they doubled the dosage until I became suicidal. And then I was eventually sent away by the government into a prison camp in the Appalachian Mountains.
What year was this?
It was 1992.
Not that long ago.
8 years ago.
Yeah.
Oh, 8.5 now.
How long were you there?
I was in that particular prison camp for about, I guess, 7 months. That was in the eastern mountains of Kentucky. And then I was interrogated for 2 nights in a locked building by a supervisor who told me that if they let me go, what would I say to people in public? And he said to me, if the U.S. were invaded by an alien or foreign power, where would my allegiance lie? And then he asked me what I knew about the Illuminati and the government and what I would say to people. And he said to me, you know, if you were to go out and say certain things, we can claim that you are mentally insane and put you in a mental institution for the rest of your life. So, of course, I told them what they wanted to hear.
Sure.
And I was going to get myself out of there. Now, mind you, even though it was a prison camp, I was in charge of the education department of the prison camp. And in fact, I was teaching classes on the language of hyperspace that I learned at Montauk and giving it to the prisoners at this camp were politicians. There was the governor of West Virginia, there were state senators, there was all kinds of high-ranking officials from all over.
This is mind-blowing, or maybe mind-expanding.
Well, and the deal was I had to give them a lesson plan every time I taught a class, which was about 2 or 3 times a week.
Right.
And then they'd review it and listen to the class as I would do it. And in fact, there were times when I would have the class in a visualization or meditation, and it would be quite silent, and over the loudspeaker they would play that Twilight Zone music.
Uh-huh.
You know, do like that.
Yeah.
So it was a big joke to them, but they was also letting me know they were listening.
Now, wait a minute. You're saying, let's just say the governor of West Virginia. Was he there in the prison camp as a prisoner?
He was an inmate.
He was an inmate. Well,
yes.
What was happening in West Virginia when he was there?
Well, all I can tell you is West Virginia must have a lot of corrupt government because half the state was in this place.
Ah.
The state senators, the governor, police chiefs, I mean, you name it. They were in this place.
They were there.
Yeah. And then they finally sent me to a camp in central Pennsylvania at the top of another mountain. And there I was again in charge of the education department. Mm-hmm. And I was also in charge or helped monitor for the National Weather Service. I would take readings for them and transmit the information because there was no stations in the area that were reliable. And so I did that for about a year.
Okay.
There again, teaching classes, doing all kinds of things for the inmates there, meeting with the prison camp and penitentiary education department and giving them my ideas of how to educate people there. And then I was finally sent, guess where, to the Philadelphia Naval Yard.
No.
Coming full circle.
Okay. And what year was this again?
That was now early 94. By the time that was October 93 when I finally got to the Philadelphia Naval Yard.
93 October.
And I was there till spring of 94.
Anything interesting happened there?
Well, there I was placed in charge of recycling material, and my supervisor there was a lady who I guess she had some kind of a romantic interest in me, or she would call me into her office constantly, and was a little too close for comfort,
mm-hmm.
for all I can say.
Mm-hmm.
Now, what she told me was, and now I never solicited any of this information. She just told me that she knew that underneath the base were tunnels that led to various parts of the country,
mm-hmm.
and that in various parts of the country, she was in charge of shipping material that was being stored in case of a national emergency in the future.
Now, do you think she was trying to get romantically linked to you to control you, or it just happened that way?
It's been my experience in my life that they have sent many women into my life as my handlers or controllers.
Right, and you're programmed to respond immediately, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Wow, and you think she was one of them, right?
Oh, I'm pretty sure that she was.
Mm-hmm. But then why would she have told you about these tunnels?
Many of the times, many of these handlers or controllers each provide me with bits of information designed to trigger certain programming in me,
uh-huh.
or to hook up to the reciprocal information that I already have.
It almost sounds as if you're a conduit, a tuning rod, or something for the balancing of energy. within this planet.
Well, that's very curious that you said that, because one of the things I teach in my lectures and seminars is how to balance the left and right hemispheres of the brain and the energy system. And I was pretty much an expert in that, but I was also considered an expert in alien civilizations. And very often, when there'd be a crash or some kind of activity where there was an artifact left, an artifact meaning part of a body, an object, what have you, I would be shown either that body part or pictures of it and asked to identify the species. And that I did up until about 91 or 2.
And how did you know, Stewart? How did you know?
I knew since I was 3 years old, when I was brought to that platform, about the species that were involved in creating life on this planet and what that whole scenario was about and how it's failed. And so this whole world, everybody on it, is an experiment or part of an experiment. And everyone on this planet is an alien to it because life here is not natural. It was either brought here or created on it.
Wow. You know what comes to mind, Stewart, is I've heard many people say that if our entire DNA was activated, we would have all the knowledge that we would need. We would know everything.
Well, 97% of all DNA, whether you're an amoeba, an alien, or an elephant, is identical. Now, science calls it junk DNA. But that 97% is the foundational mind pattern of what you would call God mind.
Right.
It's only the 3 remaining percent that differentiates species and individuals.
But is yours more activated or connected than, say, the average person here? Is that how you have this knowledge?
Well, a couple of things. Number one, human beings only use 10% of their brain.
We've heard that.
And so I teach people how to open up the other 90%. Now, whether you consider it fortunate or not, because of what I've been through, a large percentage of my mind pattern is opened and available. And when that happens, it correspondingly opens up the related DNA sequences.
Have you had a lot of success with this?
Very much so, and I teach classes in this.
And looking at your website, and we're going to provide links to your website off the CD, I see you have a lot of classes.
Yes.
But various different types of classes.
Right, because there's language of hyperspace, there's DNA, there's healing techniques, simultaneous existence, all different aspects of opening up the mind pattern.
Now, how would one feel comfortable going to your class after hearing the story of how you were controlled?
Well, that's a very common question, and it's a good question.
Okay.
And so I say, don't listen to the messenger, listen to the message. Yes, I was programmed, I was genetically manipulated, what have you. That doesn't alter the value of the information. 1 and 1 is 2, no matter if I tell you or Adolf Hitler tells you, it's the same valid information. And so the information that I teach about color codes and archetypes and hyperspace sentences, all of that is quite valid. And I encourage people to really study it for themselves. I only provide the tools. I don't make it happen for you. I tell you what you can do for yourself to open it up.
And Stewart,
then it's up to each individual.
Okay, Stewart, what do people do with these tools?
They find out who and what they are.
They find the truth of them?
That's correct. Not that it comes from me or anyone else, but it will come from themselves. They will actually access themselves.
I could see 2 things happening. I could see one becoming enlightened and accepting and loving. I could see another, upon realizing who they are and perhaps becoming fearful and not handling it very well.
Well, that is because of the conditioning that people have been through.
Right.
People are designed to identify themselves with their problem. They're too fat, they're too short, they don't have enough money, they never find a parking space. That's how they identify themselves. And the fear is, if they don't have those issues, they don't know who they'll be. So there's a fear in that. But they should also realize that that's not who they are. That's who they have been told they should be.
So do you believe in the common saying that we're spiritual beings having a human experience?
Exactly correct.
And if indeed that's true, then that really transcends this whole physical experience.
The physical reality, and there's many almost infinite physical realities, all with different vibratory rates. That's why you can't see them.
Mm-hmm.
But all of them combined is really a speck in the mind of God. The bulk of it is non-physical or energetic.
Mm-hmm.
I almost consider physical reality to be an error in thinking in God mind.
If God is capable of error.
God is capable of everything.
Yeah, indeed. That's a good way of putting it.
Yeah.
So perhaps in closing here, and you've been very gracious for spending this amount of time. I didn't know we would do this much, but let's look back at Montauk. Let's look at this experience. What can we gain from this? It happened. You were there. Al was there. Preston was there. Duncan was there. Where are we now? And for the listener, what should the listener take away from this message?
We are at a very critical point in linear time. We're at a nexus or crossing point where those who seek to control and enslave this physical reality are just about where they want to be. Now, they only have that ability because of the victimization mentality of those that they control. If people remove the victimization mentality from their mind patterns, those who control will no longer have any power over them. Tyranny only exists where there is a need for oppression. If there's total freedom and control of oneself, mind, body, and spirit, no one and nothing can ever take control of you. So it is at this point in history that every individual needs to decide for themselves whether they wish to be controlled or to be self-controlled. And if they decide the self-control and they teach that to others and so on, eventually it will reach a critical mass that will spill over to the species mind pattern, and then there'll be complete freedom within the human species, and there will no longer be tyranny or control. And that's what I hope people will understand from all of this information.
And I hope that you will be successful with your programs to help them with that.
Thank you.
I do. Stewart, it's been a wonderful hour and a half here. Thank you so much for your time.
I appreciate the opportunity.